Our very last panel today, we're going to examine the rapidly changing financial landscape of college sports with a spotlight on private equity. Our accomplished panelists will assess the implications for athletic departments, student athletes, and the competitive balance, as well as the potential opportunities and risks in this evolving era. Let's welcome the panelists for the new Playbook, Private Equity, Credit, and the Future of College Athletics. Ryan Luckey, Managing Partner and Principal at Arluck Advisors, will serve as your moderator.
Game on. Thank you. We've got three outstanding leaders in the space, from spanning administration to institutional investing to global finance. Start with Damon Evans. Since March 31, and I'll keep coming back to that, athletic director here at your Southern Methodist University. Since 1960, only 7 people have played and suited up and started or played in an NFL game and an MLB game. Chad Hutchinson, partner at Arctos Partners, is one of them.
All right.
And the smartest one of all 4, David Schmidt, from the sports franchise and global investment banking at Goldman Sachs. Before these guys were power players in boardrooms, investor conferences, athletic departments, they were all athletes. So why don't we start there? You guys can't see what's happening above you, but we've got some real muscle. And yeah, I dug into the archives. It's not as embarrassing for Dave, but for Damon, played college football at the University of Georgia. Chad, I bet Mel Kiper had some comments on your release point and arm angle, for what you're doing there as quarterback at Stanford. And David, who played baseball at Stanford and then for the Houston Astros organization for a few years before making the leap into finance. So why don't we start there? Take your administrator hat off, your investor hat off, and put your athlete self hat on. As a former athlete, what is your take on the state of college athletics and the infusion of capital and the infusion of money into the space?
You want me to start since you're looking at me, huh? I'll go first. First and foremost, thanks for having me here today. I always enjoy the opportunity to get out and speak and meet individuals and share some of the thoughts that I have in this rapidly evolving world of intercollegiate athletics. One that I would say we always got to embrace change. A lot of people run from change, but we've got to embrace it and we've got to adapt to it. So what would I have thought way back when with this infusion of capital? I think a lot of us former players think about, man, what would we have gotten paid today had we had the opportunity? I probably would have gotten paid the lowest amount of anyone up here, but if you'd have given me $50, I would have been happy. But I never really thought about it. I always looked at college athletics as an opportunity to earn an education, believe it or not. A lot of student athletes go to college with the aspirations of making it to the NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball. I always looked at the educational component, and I still believe that today is the most important aspect of what we do because of the earning power of a degree over a lifetime. But it really never came to mind. I'll be very, very candid with everybody in here. Back in the day when I was playing, there was NIL. It just wasn't legal. It was one of those things when there was the bad guy for some people, and there were what people called the $100 handshakes. In some places, it was more than $100. So unfortunately, that's what corrupted our business a little bit back in the day. We had some of that going on. But fast forward to now, and you look at what we used to couldn't send out a postcard to individuals without getting in trouble. And now kids are making hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions. Hey, I'm happy for the student athletes that they get this opportunity, but never would have imagined that it'd be where it is today.
Okay.
Yeah, my own experience, and I had a mentor of mine in town yesterday, and I actually met him when I had to stay up at Stanford over the summers to get ready for football season. And we were laughing because I used to go install sprinkler systems, commercial sprinkler systems. Then I used to come home, mow his lawn, work so I could stay in his house, so I could pay him rent. And mind you, was raised by a single mom, 5 kids, and so I didn't have a dime. And so I think about that time period, and I was like, wow, it was really formative. I had to hustle, and then I had to go play sports and perform. So it didn't quite feel right like that, but does it feel right to get paid $2-3 million a year to compete in college athletics? I don't think so. And I think one of the things that I've learned over, it's been 20 years now that I've been on the principal investing side, is that markets, right, it's an ebb and flow. And I think when I was in college, we were probably way too conservative on how we're treating athletes. And now we're way too Wild West. There's going to be a middle ground, right? And I think that when I think about middle ground, I think about a collective bargaining agreement put in place. I think about some cap and some floor. I think there needs to be an institutionalization of what's going on right now, because I just think it's absolutely the Wild West, and it's becoming a story of the haves and the have-nots. Our Stanford Cardinal right now, I actually am really worried about Stanford's just being able to compete in college athletics. SMU is doing a phenomenal job of raising capital and funding these players, but Stanford has always taken the tact of, like, we're not going to pay our players. And in this day and age, like, you're going to have to pay to play.
Look, I've been off campus for 10 years now, and looking back, if I would have been able to imagine where we would have been today at the time, I don't think I would have dreamed up something like this. And it's crazy to see the interest and the capital that's flowing into the space. And on the one hand, it's great that the athletes that are able to drive so much value to the schools and to the sport in general are able to be compensated and valued for the overall good that they bring to the sport. But echoing the sentiment of Chad and Damon, I think that there needs to be a balance as far as what ultimately is given to these guys. And at the end of the day, they're 18-year-olds. These are kids that are away from home for the first time in their entire lives, being faced with a number of different challenges that, looking back on it, I had no idea was coming to me, let alone layering on top of that all of the other things that are now being thrown at these kids. And, to some extent it's great, and to some extent they deserve that. But, on the other hand, I think there needs to be certain instances where we protect them from themselves. Because when you're an 18-year-old kid, you don't necessarily always think straight, and you don't necessarily always have that judgment that's been honed over a long period of time, just living life and going through experiences and the ups and downs. And I can tell you firsthand, when I was younger and I was at that age, I thought I was invincible. I thought it was the best thing ever, and I could get myself into trouble because of that mindset. And if you face all of the notoriety and the scrutiny that comes with all of the benefits of that plan, then you might not be ready for it and you might fall. So at the end of the day, I think it's good. I think we're heading in the right direction as far as getting to a point where everybody is ultimately going to be aligned. But at the same time, I think there's a long way to go.
Let's drill in on where you're going there. What kind of guardrails or protections need to be put in place to ensure the athletes remain the focus, so that there's less talk about the money, but there's more focus on athlete well-being? What guardrails and protections need to get infused into the system?
That's your world.
He'll go first with a thought starter.
It's interesting. I think we have to look at both sides of the equation. I always want to focus on the young men and young women who come to our programs and make sure that they're protected. Right now, you've got agents who are really getting involved in the business. I think we've got to make sure that we have the right regulations around agents and what they can do and how they represent the young men and women, because we've seen certain situations where there have been individuals that have been taken advantage of. And in this industry right now, you have agents really shopping kids and making them promises that might not be there. The other thing that I think we need to take a hard look at, and some won't like this, I think we got to take a look at our rules and regulations. We opened up this transfer portal, and we wanted to give all this free movement to these student athletes. I think everyone need to be reminded is that what we're teaching a little bit in this new world is typically when you sign a contract, you have to be held to that contract. Right now in this world of revenue share, name, image, and likeness, kids will sign contracts and then want to leave immediately. That's not the nature of how you conduct business, and that's not what's going to be waiting for them on the other side. So I think we need to do something as it relates to that. And we also have to look and remind ourselves that the more that student athletes transfer, the less that their graduation, their potential goes down with each transfer. So we need to take a look at that. And then everything else that goes on, I believe that we transitioned to a new model, and that new model is fine. But we still need to put some parameters and remind student athletes of the importance of getting a degree from the institution. we're living in a fantasy land right now. I used to think the NFL was fantasy land because in the real world, when you're playing college sports right now, if they need to see a doctor, they can see one within 24 hours, within an hour. If they need to go to the dentist, anything they need, it's right there for them. And then the type of money that they're making nowadays, most of them will not make, for those who are making $1 million, $2 million, $3 million a year, will not make that kind of money when they get out into the real world. So financial literacy and doing some things around that are extremely important as we move forward. And then at the end of the day, do we need to really get into a point, and we'll talk about this later, is would collective bargaining be beneficial for both sides? Because you can set down what the parameters are, and you know what you're getting on each side, and you know what you're giving up as well.
Is there a need for having centralized governance, like out of an NCAA model, or it does seem like the power has shifted to the conferences and even in some cases the schools? Is there a thought on, no, we have to agree on a centralized form of governance or rules we'll all play by from east to west, or does it, where's the locus of power go?
The power right now is moving with the Power Four conferences. The Power Four conferences are the ones that are actually setting the rules. When you take a look at what's going on with the House settlement, that we need to get settled here sooner rather than later, you have a clearinghouse that's been created to look at NIL deals. That's been created by the Power Four conferences. You have a new enforcement entity that is being set up. That enforcement entity is to enforce the rules associated with the House settlement. There is a CEO of that enforcement entity that will be hired. That's being set up by the Power Four conferences, and that will be paid for by the Power Four, separate from the NCAA and what they do right now. As far as governance structure is concerned, there is talk about a different governance structure out there and whether or not there is a new division that comes into play. I think that we have to really take a hard look at this. Unfortunately, the NCAA has lost the public's trust. And the gentleman to my left, these two gentlemen know that when you're running a company, if the board doesn't feel good about the CEO or the direction of the company, and the company's losing public trust, then there's a problem because that stock is going to drop. And that's what's happened to us in the NCAA. So moving to something else, we may be better served as a Power Four and those institutions who choose to be a part of this House settlement.
Anything you'd want to elaborate on that? From my time at Goldman, we never talked about protecting brand equity. It was always around firm reputation. And so the idea of having trust being central to it. You talked just a little bit from the chair you guys are sitting in and working for firms, looking at this from outside investment.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about what we're trying to accomplish as a brand, you want to be a trusted advisor. You want to gain the public's trust so that they're willing to work with you and they feel like you guys are someone that's advocating for them or your clients. In the instances of college athletics, more so along the lines of the students, which are the product, the most important thing as far as what goes into the day-to-day and what makes this great in college athletics. I think it harkens back to everybody's time in school and just understanding what it was like to be a student, and in some instances a student athlete. And as we get a little bit further away from that, you start to lose that fabric that ties everybody together. And in some instances, as I mentioned, I think it's great that players, especially ones that value and notoriety peak in college, are able to take advantage of that like they wouldn't have been able to before. But in certain instances, because the dollars are becoming so big, as Damon mentions, I think there are certain people and certain entities that are starting to swarm a little bit, and you got to make sure that you continue to protect those kids in certain instances from themselves as well.
Yeah, I mean, our business at Arctos, we've built our business around investing in pro sports franchises. But we've spent the better part of the last 4 years looking at college ecosystem, how we invest money into it. I will say, I don't know if now I have any clarity and vision on if it's investable from an institutional capital perspective. And we spent a bunch of time with athletic departments, universities. We've been in part of every conference level discussion, trying to recapitalize, trying to own a piece of it. How do we monetize this? And I think it's very challenging. And if you think about, you mentioned kind of what's going on from the architecture of the NCAA and all these, the Power Four. I think in the next 5 to 10 years, there's going to be a whole shift of not only the conference level alignment, but also just the sports within each university, right? If you think about the Olympic sports, I think it has to go back to more regionalized model. They can play these sports somewhat cost effectively. And then you have football, right? Football is its own ecosystem, and I think that'll probably migrate into its own ecosystem. I think the challenge for institutional capital, we are a private equity fund, right? We require equity-like returns. And if I think about the business model of these athletic departments, everybody's like, well, you want to go invest in SME? I would love to. But in our underwriting, when we invest in teams, there's an exit. We sell the team, right? So we invested in the Tampa Bay Lightning 2.5 years ago. The Tampa Bay Lightning just sold. It was a great return for our investors. Our investors are pension funds, endowments, university endowments. They want to return their capital, right? And the way you get that is either through a cash flow distribution or an appreciation of the asset, and you sell the asset. Are you going to sell SMU athletic department? No, right? You're not going to sell it. So it's very challenging when you think about like private equity coming into the space is how do you actually achieve the return that you've told your investors that you're going to require. So I think for us as a firm, we're thinking about the areas around college athletics that service the ecosystem where we can go invest money to grow the pie bigger for everybody.
Drill down on that. Like, where become the places when you say peripheral to maybe the university itself? Are you talking physically, like real estate? Are you talking about it?
Yeah, great
media
question.
Or a little bit everywhere?
Yeah, great question. And so we will identify as a firm these adjacencies and where we can come in, help drive outsized impact to the business, but then the business helps our teams. And so over the last 4 years, we've invested in businesses like SeatGeek, a company called GeoComply that does all the geo-compliance for the sports betting platforms, Elevate Sports Ventures, which they'll come in, it's an agency business, they'll come in and sell all the naming rights, the jersey patches, they'll help on the premium seating. In college, we just invested in Learfield. Right? Learfield, massive player in the college ecosystem, monetizing multimedia rights, commercial licensing. They're doing the plumbing in the NIL, kind of the background of the NIL. Pacquiao is a business that they own, which has 90% of ticketing in college athletics. And if I think about that platform and all the other areas that it can go, real estate, right? So all these universities, not unlike what we're doing with our pro sports teams, like in Utah, we own a big piece of the Utah Jazz and the Utah Hockey Club. Well, as part of that, we went in, we bought a regional mall, we're relocating the practice facilities, we're doing a bunch of youth facilities, we're doing a joint venture with University of Utah. We have 2 city blocks adjacent to the arena that we're building hotels. I think real estate starts to be more impactful to the platform of sports and to these athletic departments and universities. So I do think that there's these idea of entertainment districts that it will be able to monetize the platform more effectively. So yeah, it's a big area of focus.
Got it. Chair you sit in, how is capital infusion going to impact you specifically in the athletic department you run? 2-part question, we'll start here. SMU, private university, affluent student body, affluent community, start there.
Well, I agree. I think it's, with what you just said, I think it's going to be hard for private equity to get involved at the institutional level. I've had the opportunity to sit down with groups such as Redbird Capital, and they've pitched me on what they see. And I'm not a private equity guy and as smart as these guys, but, you know, you could look at a revenue sharing model. That could be a possibility. I'm not so sure the traditional private equity model works where you come in and they get a share of the profits and assume some of the risk. But again, as in that business, they like to sell things off at the end of the day. And then you could take a look at a private credit deal, basically a loan, and you renegotiate an allotment that you're going to pay back. So I'm not so sure from that aspect there's an infusion of cash or capital. Where I do think there could be some play, I think it's more at the conference level. I think that whether it's the Big Ten, the SEC, the ACC, or Big 12, what have you, you could take a look at the assets that the conference might have, because the conferences in and of themselves are different from what we do at the institutional level, and there may be some value in those assets and some arrangements that could be made. I do think that when you look at college athletics right now, you guys, a large chunk of the revenue that we receive as institutions come from our media rights deals, TV, through the conferences. If you take a look at some of that revenue and what is being driven now, but what is that next tranche of revenue that could come in? I think the biggest is going to be through the conference, so maybe there's a private equity play. I want to remind everybody, if you didn't know this, is interesting, is you think about the NFL, and I think the NFL just recently allowed private equity to come in, play with the ownership groups. But even at this juncture, they're only allowing a 10% private equity play at the NFL level. So I still think this is a slow process. And I'll also say this, and you guys may correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not so sure that I know of an institution around the country right now that has engaged in a deal with private equity. Maybe they have, and we just don't know about it. But there's been a lot of talk. And my last comment is this. The other area where I think private equity may come into play is, what does the future of college athletics look like as far as a super conference? We did all of this conference realignment, you guys, and we did it, let's be candid here, we did it because of football. Couldn't we have just realigned football and not messed with all the other sports? When you think about that, I mean, use the Pac-12, for example. The Pac-12 was totally broken apart. Couldn't we have kept all the other sports out there? And they could have played all their competitions, and you still had a Pac-12, and you could have just realigned football around the country. But what we did, we realigned everything, and now the cost associated with the travel and everything that we need to do with all those other sports is astronomical. But maybe in the future, if there's some type of super league, as some people have termed it, or a super conference, maybe that is an opportunity for private equity to come into play as well.
I'll sidebar on one part that you've both just hit, the non-revenue sports, the Olympic sports. I married a college swimmer. I was involved with track and field. And I think it would have been really cool at Indiana, somehow Oregon's in the Big Ten, but to go out to Hayward Field for a track meet, well, sounds really cool. Can that be an affordable, sustainable model? Stanford is in the Atlantic Coast Conference, but is nowhere near the Atlantic Ocean. So it makes sense that the football team can travel to Chapel Hill, or Virginia can fly out for a home game. That model doesn't work for swimming, for track and field, for fencing, for golf. Talk a little bit about, if you can, even though you all played revenue and semi-revenue sports, talk about how you think it'll, with respect to the College World Series. Yeah.
Well, let me, this is real time. I just hosted the Stanford tennis team here 3 weeks ago to dinner. And they stopped in, played against SMU. They had been, this was their third time down to Dallas in the last 6 weeks. The kids had been in class for 4 days out of the last month because they were going from here up to Boston College. And mind you, they're traveling, like, connect here, connect there. Yeah, the coach is a friend of mine, and they had a 24-hour travel day, like a full day because of delays and stuff. And he said, this is unsustainable. So I do think there needs to be a sustainability package that gets put into place. And I don't know what that looks like, but I know it's going to have to come pretty soon because the current state of play doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the Stanford baseball calendar this year, they just got back from Boston College, played at Fenway, which is a great experience, but at the same time, that's a cross-country flight. They were at Clemson earlier, they were at North Carolina, and they're going to go for the ACC tournament, which will be on the East Coast again. And I remember back when I was playing, we went to the Super Regionals down in Tallahassee against Florida State. We had another team that was with us on the flight going from the West Coast to the East Coast, which they dropped off. We had to fuel up, I think it was in Nashville, because the plane couldn't make it all the way. So imagine having to do that every single weekend and not only in the playoffs. And then on top of that, you layer in your classes, you layer in your tests, you layer in everything else that you have going on. And it really just puts a lot of strain on these student athletes. And I think it works if you're doing something like football where it's once a week. These are big business. But for something like tennis or golf or swimming, and in certain instances, maybe even the sports that play midweek, I think that's going to be a really big strain on these athletes, and you got to figure out what's best for their time and for their development.
Surge in on what I asked you about a private university. You've been the AD here for 1 month. Put your hat on as AD at Maryland and Georgia. And how does everything we're talking about here apply to public universities, state universities that are led by a state bureaucracy, often with politicians looking to make a point?
Well, obviously, at a private, you have a little bit more flexibility to do things. You have a board of trustees here that governs the institution. But when you're at a public, you have a board of regents, and you have other institutions that regents governs. So when they're making decisions, that decision touches so many different institutions within that system, whether it's the state system of Maryland or the state system of Georgia. So I do believe there are some unique advantages that we have here as a private that allow us to bring some more business principles to bear. I'm going to use something very, very simple. If you're going out and doing things now, in certain parts of our business, you need to be in a position where you can incentivize people and pay bonuses and do things like that. We can do that when we put coaches on contracts, but at a public staff, you can't do those things, and it's hard to attract sometimes the caliber of talent that you need at that level. I see some institutions, Kentucky they're looking at moving their athletic department into an LLC and separating out from the institution as a whole. I was reading a little bit about that and talking to a couple of people that I work with, as well as our general counsel, trying to look at some of the advantages that they're going to gain from that by going to an LLC. As compared to what we have here as a private. So, we're all looking
You
at...
can sell an LLC. I'll come invest in
You
that.
took my question away, yeah.
And that's
I'm in now.
That's where I think that they're moving into a model. It's going to be easy to engage with private equity groups when you're an LLC as compared to when you're a part of the public institution. Also, what you'll be able to do, and we go to private equity, you could technically sell a stake in that, that you take it out from under the umbrella of the state system, the government, and so forth. I want to just jump back to something that I think is really important here as we talk about this, because I like to stay focused on the student athlete. And it's interesting in the changes that we made, you guys. We made changes because of the sport of football. And we moved these conferences all over the country, whether it's Stanford coming all the way down to the Atlantic Coast Conference and what have you. The sports that have been impacted the most are the Olympic sports. So I use my time in the Big Ten, coming from the Big Ten. Football team was only going, if you were in the Big Ten and you were in the original part of the conference, you're only going to the West Coast one time a year. One time a year. It's not a big deal. But if you're playing soccer, if you're playing baseball, if you're running track, if you're playing tennis, and you're playing golf, those sports are impacted the most with regard to travel. And at the same time, from an NIL or revenue share perspective, those are the sports that are being paid the least, but actually being impacted the most. We will get to regionalization at some point in time. I don't think that we'll continue to travel these sports all across the country.
Chad and Dave, talk about how your experience as an athlete before you became investors, before you became involved in banking, how does that inform your investment philosophy? Not just the well-being of the students, but more of how you think of investing through the lens of an athlete.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. So my journey, I played 8 years of professional sports and then went way back and restarted my life. I had my midlife crisis when I was 28 and got started over. And like I said, I've spent the last 20 years on the principal investing side. I had to learn for probably 5 or 10 years, the tools to invest, actually like the skill set of investing. And so I never thought like I'd implement some of my old athletic kind of background into the investing side of it until I actually built out the skills needed to be an investor. And so I'd say for like the last 10 years, it's been really helpful to have that kind of background in athletics. And you start to see some of these intangibles that start flowing through teamwork and diligence and discipline and all those other things. But for the first 10 years, I was like, I don't know what application there is. But then you start to realize that investing, it's not just numbers in and out, right? It's not a fancy spreadsheet. So much of it is contextual and storytelling, and there's a lot of art. There's very little science when you actually get down to it. And I think that over my career, the last 20 years, is like the human element of investing is 80% of it. And so I think that having this background in athletics, where you're part of a team, you understand what resilience and perseverance is incredibly impactful to my investing career.
Yeah, I echo a lot of what Chad just said right there. I mean, when it comes down to it, I think the majority of your success and the majority of things that I've seen that have worked well in my life have been a product with dealing with other people and knowing how to relate, how to work together, how to come to a common ground. And that's something that you definitely get in sports more so than a lot of other areas in life. And, you know, Chad knows this very well, but when you're playing a sport in college, your day generally tends to be wake up early, go run and work out, get breakfast, go to class, have lunch, out to the field, work out again, homework, then you're in bed and you're doing it all over again. And that happens 4 years in a row. So you got to really understand how to manage your time, how to prioritize things, how to have grit and how to push through, and frankly, how to work together with other people, because you're spending hundreds of hours with this core group of people for 4 years, and these become your brothers. And it's funny because, you know, I'm in a fantasy league with all of my teammates from back when we were in college, and we see each other every single year, and we still laugh about the things that we did. And a lot of other people don't necessarily have those experiences, and there are other ways you can get it as well. But, you know, going through the fire with these guys and really having your mettle tested and coming out on the other side builds that confidence that you really know what you need to do, and you can figure it out if you don't at the end of the day.
Dave, I'll ask you to project what into the example you just gave, and maybe you can help here. You just gave us a timeline of day from 5:30 a.m. wake up till midnight in bed. Now throw in NIL commitments into that day. What's different? How is your day impacted by those NIL commitments?
I mean, there's only 24 hours in a day, so something's got to give, frankly. And if you've got every minute of every day planned out for certain things and you have to insert something else into it, then you're going to have to pull something out of the equation. And, you know, in certain instances, people will understand what's important and keep the main thing the thing. And to me, when I was in school, that was sports and school, and then try to figure out some other fun stuff to do on the side and hanging out with your friends. But if you've got another thing to throw into the equation, certain areas are going to have to suffer, and you just hope that people don't make the decision to make it one of those things that should really be your focus.
I'm always candid, and so I'm going to be candid today.
Thank you.
It's interesting. Let's not confuse what NIL really is, you guys. What's really been going on. Raise your hand. How many of you have seen, outside of Caitlin Clark, Juju Watkins, Cooper Flagg, how many times have you seen an actual student athlete in a major commercial or anything for some company? You don't see it that often. You see a few. There are true NIL deals that are going on out there when you've got your social media engagements high and you endorse a product. If you look across the spectrum of NIL, the ones that kind of make the most money in that area are Olympic sports. And then if you really want to focus down, it's the female student athletes, because they're better connected and engaging and endorsing products. And to be quite candid, the guys don't get out there and do that much. What it's been is we've been passing a collection plate. It's like being at church. You pass the collection plate, you take up the collection, and then you give the money out to the student athletes. Those student athletes in football and basketball, and the rules have allowed this. It has allowed collectives to come into play to be able to go out and raise money and then pay student athletes. And so, you know, you talk about the time demands. I'm just going to be candid. There aren't a lot of time demands on those football and basketball players getting paid $500,000 or $1 million. There might be a few small things that they do, but it's not there. And that's just the nature of the beast right now. But it's more in those other sports that they do have time demands, because they've gone out there and really done what you call true fair market value NIL. And some people may disagree with the term fair market value, but I'll also say this to you, is I always look at this entity, Deloitte, that's going to handle the clearinghouse, and the clearinghouse is going to look at all deals that are $600 and above to assign a fair market value. Whether it works remains to be seen. But I'm going to go back and say this again. You look at NFL and NBA players, how many of them you actually see endorsing products nationwide, Patrick Mahomes, maybe LeBron. And if you really go look at the amount of money they're generating off endorsements, it's not as high as people might think. I'm not saying it's insignificant, but where I come from in the Maryland area with Lamar Jackson, I don't know if I've ever remember seeing him endorsing that much at all. And if you go look at his endorsement deals, Lamar Jackson, the quarterback for the Baltimore Ravens, he's making some good money, but we've got student athletes in college making more than pro players. That tells you a little something is off.
So how do you create, question from the audience, how do we create more opportunities and career paths in this business so the industry continues to reflect the communities where we live and work?
So I was just with Andrew Luck, the GM of the Stanford football, and thinking about, when you talk about like in the communities that you live and work and how you stitch together, every community is bespoke to that community. Like SMU is very, like, I think it's a phenomenal opportunity in this community, but like Stanford, with Andrew, you think about like my RN at my dorm is Neil Mohan, the CEO of YouTube, right? Like he would love to get involved with the athletes in there. And so I challenged Andrew, like we have to rethink at Stanford this whole premise of like, what do you get when you come to Stanford? And so maybe it isn't, they don't have a huge NIL book like Texas or even SMU, their ability to pay, which I don't know why we don't, but is there other things that we can stitch together in the community that creates a holistic compensation that's not just here's $2 million for this, but also helps these student athletes on their career path? And I think every community needs to figure out what are those unique factors that help stitch together the athletics with the community to make it sustainable. And that's bespoke to the different communities and universities that it's in.
Okay, we'll wrap up here. 5 years out, where's this all going? One prediction from each of you independently, or if you want to tag on and elaborate, that's fine. But one prediction on the future of where in capital infusion and institutional capital, how it's going to impact college athletics.
So I don't know if we'll necessarily have a direct institutional capital investment. We may not. But I do think that there will be opportunities for additional commercial partnerships between various college entities and other commercial businesses, some of which may have institutional capital backing, some of which may just be businesses. So I think this is all sort of coming together to create a broader flywheel effect, because at the end of the day, these are big businesses, big media and entertainment properties.
In 5 years, just kind of how I started off with is the ebb and flow. I actually think we find some middle ground in 5 years, because I think it's unsustainable as it currently is. So,
Can I use more than just one?
Sure, please, yeah.
First of all, I'm waiting to see if there's an executive order that may be coming out. There's a lot of talk right now about a potential executive order coming out after Nick Saban went and had a meeting with the president. What I see is this. I see another round of realignment. I see the potential to aggregate TV rights. Instead of having TV rights with the Big 12 and they got their deal, and the ACC with their deal, and the Big 10 and the SEC having their deals, what if you put all those deals together? Imagine the amount of money in that portfolio there would be more than what it is separate. And then does that form some simulation of a super league or a super conference? I think that's a possibility out there in the future. And then the last thing that we may get to, and some might not like this, is we may be at collective bargaining and they may be classified as employees.
When you say Super League, are you strictly looking at it through the lens of football, or are you looking to, if we could aggregate the media rights for football, basketball, women's basketball, up and down the chain?
I think you would be looking at it from a perspective of starting with football, but then you would bake basketball into it as well. It's interesting. They're both important, extremely important, but at the end of the day, we know that football is driving it right now. Football is the one that is generating the most revenue. That's not to say that basketball is insignificant, because it's not. I do know in this new structure that has been discussed within the NCAA, one of the challenges, it's football. I want to remind everyone, it's not an NCAA championship.
Yeah.
It's a championship by the college football playoff. There's no money going into the NCAA and being distributed back to the institutions for football. It goes to the college football playoff, and it's being distributed to the institutions from there, with the lion's share of it going to the Power Four. Well, the NCAA basketball tournament, those revenues go into the NCAA, and those revenues are divided up amongst all Division I, which there's 358, 360 Division I teams, and some of that revenue is going to Division II and Division III. What people fear is if you take the model that we have with college football and you move it out from under the NCAA, then is that revenue going to primarily go to the Power Four and the other institutions? So there is a little bit of a tussle over that right now, but I think you would bring basketball along, but at first I think it's going to be primarily looking at football.
Well, I'll call our shot there. This is the last session. Over the next 5 years, there's going to be World Cup, Women's World Cup, Summer Olympics, eventually a Winter Olympics back in Salt Lake. I propose we bring all three of you back in 5 to 7 years after everything has passed, and we'll play back the tape, correct the assumptions you made that were false. We'll raise you up for all the assumptions you made that are great, but this is going to be a fascinating space as it evolves. Credit to SMU for bringing these guys together. Give them a round of applause.